let's get the show started. Today, today we have Victoria Hochberg, who's from the class of 1964. So we'll start out our conversation with Victoria, and then we'll have a little bit of a Q&A afterwards, so everyone can ask and get some background tidbits or advice from Victoria. So Victoria, you online there? You can all hear us. Good.
I can hear you.
Oh, perfect. So thanks for taking the time, Victoria. I know you've got a busy schedule still today, and but I was, we're all Antiochians here. We're all come from different year groups. You might see a few of your friends in here as well. What made you decide to come to Antioch, I guess?
Well, it's not your typical story, so it's a little weird, but in New York, there's something called the SPs, which means special progress, which means that you can get through high school in 3 years instead of 4. So we all did that. I have 2 older sisters. We did that. And then you basically get funneled to the city colleges in New York, which at my father's era, he would refer to the city colleges as the Harvard of the proletariat. So, you didn't argue with that. So, okay, I'll go to city college. And after 2 years, it's like, okay, no, this is a bit much, commuting on the subway. And so a friend of mine and I went up to Cambridge. We visited Cambridge, Massachusetts for the weekend. And by the time I got home, I announced to my parents that I was not going to return to City College. And they were like, oh dear. Now I have 2 older sisters, and they had both gotten married within the previous 4 years. So we could not afford to send me to college out of town. It's an out of town school. That was like, wow. Mm-hmm. So my mother said, well, they had friends they were progressives. So they had friends who had children at Antioch. And my mother said, well, maybe we could send her to Antioch. And my father was like, oh my God, you could just see the dollar signs in his head. So he said, okay, here's the deal. You could either have a wedding or go to an out-of-town school. And I said, and I think I was like 18, I said, oh, I promise you, I said this, I said, oh, I'm never getting married. So yes, I want to go to Antioch. So that's how I got to Antioch. It was, thank God, my parents knew of Antioch, and thank goodness my father made that kind of wonderful, I had to choose one or the other, and that's what happened. So I got to Antioch that way.
Any classes or professors that you might have, attributed to your success or were influential at that time?
Well, when I was at City College, I had a history professor, and it was a Greek, ancient civilization, and I was hooked immediately, and so I knew I wanted to major in history. When I got to Antioch, I sort of realized that I also loved literature. So I don't know that any of you will remember him. Larry Eldridge was an English professor, English teacher. He was wonderful. And he was somebody who, when I went to one of my co-ops and came back, I had him before co-op and then after. He looked at me and he said, you've grown up. He actually noticed me. I mean, that was a shock, but he said, you've grown up in the interim. It was really, and he was one of my favorite teachers. But of course, Louis Fuller, everyone remembers him, and Roger Williams, and but I really, he made an impact. He had an effect on me, Lawrence Eldridge. Do none of you know him? He was wonderful.
Well, maybe we can discuss that in the chats afterwards. So I think every co-op, matures us, and we always come back a much better person. And it's always amazing. You go to a strange city, you might know one person, and you end up leaving. And I tell the story all the time. You end up leaving knowing and having met hundreds of people, and that has to have a positive impact.
Oh, well, my final co-op had to be 3 semesters because I was a transfer student. At one point, my father said, "What am I paying the college for? You're never there." But that was the the three semesters that I created my future for me, and that was because of Antioch. I arrived in San Francisco. We drove out from Ohio to San Francisco. I arrived. Somebody told me about something called the San Francisco Mime Troupe, or Meme Troupe, they call themselves. And so I auditioned and got in. And in order to earn a living in San Francisco, I walked down the street and there was a sign that said Studio 16. I had no idea what that is. I walked in and I asked if they needed a receptionist, and they said, "No, no, no, we don't need a receptionist. We need somebody to do idiot splicing." And I said, "Well, wait a minute, I'm not an idiot, but I'm sure I could learn how to do splicing." And that was the first job I ever had in the film business. So by the time I got back to Antioch for my final 2 semesters, I mean, I had others before, of course, but my final 2, I had worked in the film business and I had been a performer. And that was, what else did I need? I mean, that was it. And I owe it all to Antioch. I would never have ever have been able to do that had I stayed in New York, ever.
What did you go right to LA after
Oh
Antioch?
God, no. No, 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 no. I came back to New York, and the head of the committee in San Francisco actually came to New York to try to get me to go back, but no, I wanted to work in film, just to sort of, that was going to be my career. And I didn't even think of LA because that was the movie business, but New York is mainly documentaries.
Mhm.
And I worked for PBS, and I was able to really work my way up. And then after almost like 8 or 9 years, I realized that I wanted to work on narrative films, and that meant I had to go to New York. But by then I was a member of the Directors Guild. I had even been nominated for an Emmy. And that night I took my father to the Emmy Awards, it was local, it was New York. And we went to the plaza afterwards, and guess who was sitting at the next table? Mick Jagger. And I said, Daddy, that's Mick Jagger. He had no idea who it was. It was like, oh my God. So no, then after that, I said, okay, I think it's time to go to LA. And then I came to LA.
Mhm. So how long were you here in LA before you realized that there were limited opportunities for women directors?
I could be snarky and say about an hour, but well, the first job I had was a film that I made got shown at the Telluride Film Festival. And actually, this is how I got to LA. I met a couple of people at Telluride who worked for Roger Corman, and they saw my film, and they said, you should come to LA because you could work as, in the editing department for Roger Corman. And I knew who Roger Corman was. And so I said, would you give me a job if I came? And he said, this is John Davis. He said, yes. And so I said, okay, I'm coming. And so that's how I got there. But that was to be an editor, which I had already been a director in New York. So I had to sort of back up a little bit. But that was when I realized this is not New York. You're not in Kansas anymore. You're not, this is very different. So it was a very, it was like, I think it was 14 years
Mhm.
before I actually got to direct a professional, network television program.
Mhm. I'm trying to lead into the, one of the high points of your, what I would call a contribution to
Oh,
humanity,
yes.
right?
Okay.
Your involvement
Well,
in the,
okay. So I see what, okay. You had to give me
Mhm.
my cue, I guess. Now I get it. Okay. So yes, it was a long time. And there was a meeting of women in film. And, I knew a lot of women here by then because I had lived here for over 10 years. And we all looked at each other at that meeting of women in film. And we all said, you're never supposed to say that you're not working in LA. That's like taboo. So we all looked at each other, and I knew two of them from New York. I said, Lynn, are you working? No. Nell, are you working? No. And then there were three others, and three others, and we all said no. And these were accomplished women. None of us were working. And so we said, we've got to do something.
Mhm.
And so we did.
So every time I watch that, I have to sort of sigh, and I'm really, it really brings to light the issues, and it wasn't that long ago, right? I mean,
It's getting longer.
it's getting longer, but you know, to I don't know, just
No, not, if you lived through it, it wasn't long ago. It was like yesterday, because
Mhm,
things up until 3 years ago, things had not changed
mhm.
really. But they changed a little bit, of course, but
Well, you had quite a nice career after that, right? So it did
yeah,
change for some people, and I think
yeah.
I think it gave hope, I think, to a lot of aspiring directors or filmmakers that maybe we're seeing, that now because.
Well, it gave more than hope. Within the first decade after that lawsuit, the statistics went from 1/2 of 1% or one half of a cookie to 16%
Mhm,
of the directors hired in television
mhm,
were women. In feature films, it was much less. It was like 7 or 8%.
mhm,
But in 1995, we got a new head of the Directors Guild, and it was a very different sensibility there. And the statistics started to go down again.
mhm,
And then 35 years after we formed this committee, the committee stayed alive. Most of us, had to move on, and I did move on to become a writer and a director. That's how I got my first job. I wrote my
mhm.
first job. And I had a very wonderful career in episodic television. In fact, Jonathan Zimmerman, who's here, was my AD. And
Mhm.
he's the greatest. In any case, so 35 years later, there was this women's steering committee that we had created was now led by a lot of the women who, I think if you remember in the interview, I said that those production companies started hiring women who were members of that production company, the script supervisor, the receptionist, the second AD, the UPM, maybe one of the writers, and they all became directors. And so those women in that 10-year period had, they were really building a career.
Mhm.
And then, but by the time 35 years rolled around, those women, and I'm going to say something that is really upsetting, but it's true. Many of those women didn't reach out and help other women, because even if it's 16%, you're going to hope that you're going to be one of the 16%. When we had 1/2 of 1%, we had nothing to lose. We said to each other, what do we, at first we said, well, we can't do this. We're going to, they're going to be angry at us or something. So we all said, what are they going to do? Not hire us? They're not hiring us anyway. So we said, absolutely. So we got to do this. But when it's 16%, you have a glimmer that it will happen. In any case, the women who now are in charge of the women's committee did not help other women. And so there were three radicals who sort of came in and created that event that little film was made for. And even that was, they all said, oh, you didn't begin your committee until 1991. And we said, no, 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 it was 1979, 80. I mean, it was just, so what I'm saying is that, and this happens a lot in a lot of social movements, the people who kind of, clear the brush, step away and watch, hopefully there's enough brush cleared so enough people can travel through. But those people did not reach out behind them. That was very distressing. Things are different now. This is only, 6 years later, but things have changed so much. And that's really what's exciting. I think the Women's March for me was a total, it was this aha moment when I saw that what we had done was important. What we had done, we did the right thing, because the Guild kind of tried to bury what we had done because they were humiliated because the judge threw the case out of court, saying that the Guild itself was in a conflict of interest because directors hire assistants and all the directors were not hiring women or minorities. So the judge said, you don't have a case here. As you don't have a class is really what they said. You can't have a class action suit. But since then, that was in 2014, 15, things have really, really accelerated. So I really feel.
I think this year we can look forward to at least 2 nominees for the Academy Awards for women directors. So I think
correct. That's correct.
That's a great thing.
Well, yeah, I did a little research here. Once you start doing data, you can't stop. So I did a little more data here. Let me see if I can find it. It's 92 years. The Oscars have been in place for 92 years. And I would say at least 400 men have been nominated. It took 50 years for the first woman to be nominated, and that was Lena Wertmüller in 1977. Wow. And she was not an American. I'm really more interested in the American women because European women always have worked more than American directors. European, because the governments, many of the film industry is sponsored by the government, and so it's much more equitable. It took 74 years for the first U.S. woman to get a nomination, and that was Coppola's daughter, Sophia. And then 80 years later, the first woman won, and that was Catherine Bigelow for Hurt Locker. That was what, 12 years ago?
Yeah.
She won in
That's recent history for me.
Right. Now, 91 years later, the third and fourth American women are being nominated. And we don't know what, well, hopefully, but so out of 400 men nominated, 6 were women and 2 of the 6 were foreigners. So only 4 American women have been nominated and 1 won. I mean, so that's really, you can see the scope of the terrible bigotry. It's really horrible, but it's changing. A lot's happening. A lot.
Well, I think Antioch has a good history of, film people on the film industry.
Yes.
So do you have any words of advice for current Antioch students or recent graduates? What advice would you have?
The film industry today is not the film industry that any of us would have entered when we graduated. So it's completely altered. And that's a good thing. That's why there are so many more women working now. In fact, in television, a third, this is something I just, this year, the reports have come out about 2020. A third of the directors in television are female, which is extraordinary. I mean, to think of 0.5%, now it's 33%, something like that. In features, it's not quite as good, but it's getting up there. And women of color are having a huge amount of success as film directors. And so that's what happened to our lawsuit. This is a little wrinkle that, very few people know about, but we got the approval to have a lawsuit. It was just the Women's Committee. and a bunch of African-American men came to that meeting and told us something that we didn't know. They told the whole national board, we were all sitting there, and they said that at least 10 years earlier during the civil rights movement, they had tried to get the Guild to do something on their behalf, and the Guild refused.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know that. And so they said, would the women be willing to wait a year until they gathered their statistics? And they wanted to join us. And we kind of, our committee was only by consensus. So we kind of huddled and we said, yes, we will wait a year. And we did. But in that year, Reagan was nominated, and the judge that we got was a Reagan appointee. So that was, I'm glad we made the decision, but that kind of threw the kibosh on the lawsuit. But the good thing is that the studio started hiring women, and they saw that we were not going to cast a spell on their episodes, or have terrible things happen while we were directing. So they kept hiring us, because a lot of the actors loved that there were women directors. And women, a lot of the crew guys, of course, loved that there were women directors. It was a co-ed crew, which hadn't happened before.
Yeah.
So those were all good things, even though we lost the lawsuit, or there never even was a lawsuit.
I think you made the point, and you made the progress, and positive results from all that activity.
Definitely.
Well, thank you for being an Antioch radical. I think there are a couple of questions coming up in the chat there. So if you're okay with that, can we open it up to a Q&A?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Right. So Jesse, if you can, I don't know what the rules are. I think people have to unmute themselves and ask a question, or they can ask a question in the chat. And Charles Rosenberg asked if that video was available to stream, and yes, it's available at the dga.org, and you can just search for Victoria Hochberg, and that'll come up, or the 35th.
Yeah, I think if you search for me, you'll get one of those 3-hour interviews, which really, I don't think you want to do that. It's the 35th anniversary of this Women's Steering Committee. And I want to congratulate Peter, because he got it. I mean, I was shocked. I didn't know we could do that, but he did it. So
it's on the internet, I can find it. So
okay, well, you found it. So Nancy Pollock said she went to the 35th anniversary of that. She was there that night, and
I was just saying, yes, I was.
Oh, there you go, Nancy. And she said the stats were grim. Well, yes, they were grim. Yes, but that was only 5 years ago. They were still bad, but because of Me Too and because of so much has been happening, I think Donald Trump, in a funny way, did us all a favor. He woke us back up to the fact that we've got to get off our lazy butts and fight and get back in the struggle. And so I think that's really what happened. I'm convinced of it. That's one of the things anyway that happened. So.
And can I just say that event, the 35th anniversary, at the time I was working for AFI in the directing workshop for women. Right. And it really energized, that's when I first saw this video. It really energized a lot of our women who were in the program.
Oh, good, good. And so that was 35 years after we formed. I mean, when you think about these numbers, to me are like science fiction. How could 35 years have gone by? It just feels unbelievable. Now it's more, it's 40.
Well, and the numbers were so terrible.
Yes, at that point, the numbers I think was about 13% of women were working in television. And of course, television's much easier because there's so many more outlets and so many more opportunities to start being a director in television rather than in features, because you go into an organism, a system, a show that's already set up with a producer, writers, the crew, the cinematographer, the assistant directors, and they know that show. So they're willing to support you. It's very hard for you to really fail because your your assistant director will tell you, you'll never make you have too many setups here, you'll never make your day. Or the writer will say, I think I have to cut this scene. I see it, I wrote too much. You have a lot of support. If they like you. If they don't like you, you don't have any support, of course. If the crew doesn't like you, you're dead. But so it's easier in television. But in feature films, it takes years to set up a feature film, and there's so much more money at stake. So that's why the statistics are never as good in features as they are in television for women and minorities.
Can I ask one more question, and then I don't want to be the only one talking.
Yeah.
But as an older woman, I am finding it very difficult. I wondered if how you feel about that. I'm thrilled for the younger women I know, and particularly women of color that I've worked with, but for myself, and I'd love to get your take on that.
Well, here's the deal. I sound like, what's his name? I sound like Biden. Here's the deal, sorry. The movie business is a glamour business, and it's about youth, and it's about struggling to become the person you want to become. It's not about old people thinking about whether or not they did become the people they wanted to become. And there is a youth cult in Hollywood, definitely. So how do I feel about it? Not so good. None of the women of the original 6 got to have the career that I had. And no woman my age is directing except Agnes Varda, but she's no longer directing. That's just unfortunate because, Clint Eastwood is what, 103, and Sidney Lumet was 102 or what. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but these guys get to keep working. Mm-hmm. But that's the way it is. And hopefully once a woman has a body of work, and, she becomes like the great Catherine Bigelow or the great Dee Reese or the great Ava DuVernay, they're not going to say to her, look, you're 72 or whatever, you're not going to work anymore. That's just, it'll change. But because it's only been in the last decade that women have a body of work, that we'll see what happens. But you're right, there's terrible ageism, terrible. But that's another battle. And I guess, we could start doing that. And the good thing about that is that it has nothing to do with gender or color. So these old guys are feeling the pinch as well. So maybe we get more support.
Yeah, some are, but like you say, there's others that doesn't matter how old they are. If they can sell a seat, they will get the job.
That's right. Yeah. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yes, Joan.
I think I'm in the stack.
Yes.
So Victoria, I was very intrigued by your comment that the actors love female directors. Can you say more about that? Why?
Well, let me put it this way. The female actors love women directors. The male actors, it's a whole new deal. I remember when I directed Sex and the City, Mr. Big loved that I was a director because his mother had been a journalist who had suffered from sexism. Mm-hmm. And he kind of, now Sarah Jessica Parker didn't like the amount of time that Mr. Big was spending talking to me. So there was like, uh-oh. So I would always say to him, Chris, we just, get back to the set. We can't talk this much. So it's like a double-edged sword. But a lot of the women and a lot of the day players, in other words, people who are guests on the show, they really said, oh my God, I've never had a woman director. They would often say that. And it's so wonderful because the guys care. Well, this is, a cliche, but you'd hear that the guys, all the male directors, they just talk to the cinematographers about lenses and how long is the dolly, but they don't talk to us as actors. And the women tend to do that. I mean, this is what I heard because I've never worked with another woman director. I don't know, but that was definitely, we would get that kind of feedback. Yes. I think it's probably changed by now because there are so many more women directing. But when I would do a show and I would get people coming up to me and say, "We're so glad you're here. We're so," it was very nice. It was actually really nice to hear that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so another, Sally Ann Rosenberg has a question from the chat. She's sitting on the floor, so you can't see her video. But she'd like to know, what is it about directing that you liked so much?
Oh boy, that's a wonderful question.
That's next month's show, maybe, but.
Well, I can give you the snarky answer, which is that I'm a control freak, I guess. That's one thing.
No.
I'll tell you a story. I was the assistant to the director at the New York Shakespeare Festival when we were doing King Lear. And it was an all-black cast. James Earl Jones was King Lear. And we had the night before, I was his assistant, and he was a very good director, Ed Sheeran. And the night before we opened, there was a dress rehearsal, and it was chaotic. I had such an anxiety attack, and I was just his assistant. And the next night when we opened, it was perfect. And I said, Ed said, he said, let them do it, let them be. It's okay, it's all gonna be okay. And when the opening night, it was, I'm gonna start to cry right now, but it was one of those things where it's like, this is a miracle, this is a mystery, this is unbelievable. Because they had rehearsed and practiced. If you do your work and you set it up properly, the creativity, it finally blossoms and it's born. And it was the most exciting thing. Also, I have to say, in the second grade, I had a puppet show. I created puppets, newspapers, and then I put cloth on top and I drew faces, and and the teacher made me go to all the different classrooms to show them the puppet show. And I had also written it. So I think that was the germ. But that experience on New York Shakespeare Festival in the park, Central Park, was, I think that's right before I came to LA. And that was very important to see that it's possible, even though you think it's going to be a disaster, you just hang in and it'll work. That was really good.
Josh, if you want to ask your question, go ahead. I think we can give you the mic.
Oh, okay, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi. Thanks so much for being here. Yeah, I just was wondering, after the lawsuits, once the statistics became, you said something like 16%. What was the environment like on set once you all were working more? Did you still encounter that kind of resistance or discrimination on set? And I imagine you still had to.
So that was up into 1995. So you would go on a set and you would get people who, you have to take this with a grain of salt, but the cinematographers, many cinematographers want to direct, but they know that somehow they don't have the affinity, they don't have the head for it, and they get a little annoyed at how did somebody who's lower on the food chain, a woman, get to direct, and why aren't they? So they would do things that were not nice. They would sort of do things that tested you. The AD's the same. I remember I had one AD, meaning assistant director. I had one AD, and of course, Jonathan, where are you? You still here, Jonathan Zimmerman? He was wonderful. But before Jonathan, there was an AD who, it was my first day, and I could tell he was a little annoyed that I was directing and he wasn't. And he set up the schedule so that I had the most difficult scene to do, the first scene on the first day of the shoot, because the AD set up the schedule. And we were looking it over, and I said, why why are we doing that? He said, well, you know, get it out of the way. And I said, oh, no, 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 no. I said, I want the easiest scenes first, the scenes that have the fewest people so that I can get to meet the actors, know them, know how they like to work, who likes to rehearse, some don't like to rehearse, some don't, some aren't good with marks, some can't remember their lines. So I get to know the problems of each actor. And then the last day and the last scene of the last day should be the big scene. And he sort of looked at me and I knew basically based on that look that he had done that deliberately to test me. But that's not nice.
No.
That's not nice. You don't do that. What if I had said, oh, okay, I would have failed. I mean, it would have been awful. But that happened a lot. That happened a lot.
Well, that's the end of the question. Any other people want to speak up?
Jonathan, you should, how did you like working with women directors, Jonathan?
I had no problem with it at all. In fact, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was raised by strong women. I respect strong women. I enjoy strong women. And I just thought it was great.
He was,
But I am an assistant director. I am a cog in the production machinery of this organization, which squirts out shows. And most of the people in that industry are literally just trying to get the job done. And so we just get the job done. But then you run into someone like you who actually wants to make a little movie which we can show on television. God, it was terrific. It was wonderful. And the director of photography did not like that. And that's too bad because he could have been a part of it.
that's right.
But,
on that
it was
on
wonderful.
that show, the director of photography was not nice, actually. But I want to say something about Jonathan. Before we started working, I didn't even know who he was. I certainly didn't know he was an Antiochian. He called me, and he didn't know I was an Antiochian, but he called me. This was very unusual. He said, I'm Jonathan Zimmerman. I'm going to be your first AD, and I want you to know that I work for you. I'm your assistant. Now, this is like, nobody says that. He said, I don't work for the producers. I work for you. And it was like, oh, thank you, God, thank you. And then I got to the office a couple of days later, and we sat down and we had a chat, and I'll never forget, you were sitting across from me, and we realized we both went to Antioch. It was like, oh my God, a double blessing. It was really great.
It was like, how did that happen? I mean,
I don't know. It happened. I'm so happy.
it does. And it's happened before too. It's been fun.
Good, good.
Not a
So,
coincidence.
Victoria, you were a pleasure to work with. And it wasn't just the little movie. It was, you thought about transitions and ways that things were going to go together. And by walking the sets with you, you were so far along in your concept of the show that you could tell me the things that you were interested in developing. And so I could schedule it. Most of the time, an AD schedules in a complete vacuum. You get very little input from anybody. And if you can spend some time with the director, that helps. That's not always possible. So you're guessing, well, if I were directing this, this is how I would want to do it, or this is probably the best way to do it. But with you, and also with Kevin Connor, another director, a favorite of mine, I knew what you wanted, so we could do it. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I don't get to work with other directors. I get to work with other assistants and cameramen. So thank you for saying that. Thank you. That's very nice. I didn't realize that you felt that. So thank you.
Well, I will never forget that the first time we walked the sets, I had just met you. We were walking the sets. They're dark and smell kind of dusty, and we're walking the sets. And I realized as we were walking through the sets that you were seeing the movie. And so all I had to do was like stand behind it. Okay, we're going to go this way, and then we're going to go that way. It was a lot of fun.
What was the movie?
State of Grace.
It was a television show
Uh-huh.
about two girls who were, one was Jewish and one was Catholic. And the Jewish girl gets to go to the Catholic school because that's the better school or something like
I think
that.
I saw that. Yes, I'll have to go look at that again.
And they become best friends.
Uh-huh.
And some of the actors were fabulous, fabulous actors. But there was a DP who was not nice. And it, when you get that, because there's a golden triangle, the director, the assistant director, and the cinematographer. And if there's one break in that, it's torture. And the cinematographer was not cooperative at all. And Jonathan, I had to rely a lot on him, but it was just a wonderful show, beautifully written. And then it got canceled.
Well, I think
we had-
ABC Family got sold or something. It was,
Yeah.
yeah, it was.
2 seasons. I think we had 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And then I did a show called Kitchen Confidential with Bradley Cooper. And the night my episode was going to be on, they canceled the show. So my episode never got to be on, but I did get to work with Bradley, and he's very, very good. He's very good. I knew he was going to be a big star, and he is. But you never know, and you never know what the chemistry is going to be between you, the cinematographer, the AD, and the actors. And if it's not good, it's horrible. And hopefully you do whatever you can to make it good, because you don't want to work under those horrible conditions.
No. No. I did ask David Vincent's question about what the film was, but one more question here we have from Alan Brewer. Alan, you want to just speak up?
Unmute, sure. Graduated in Antioch in '74. Hi there. Thank
Hi.
you. And I am in the business, as it were, but I am not a director. However, my daughter, who's now 28 and who did not go to Antioch but went to NYU Tisch for film and television production and so on, is a writer, director, has an agent, is climbing the ladder, and
Good.
And she's been really having more traction as a writer with people
Yeah.
considering her projects and optioning projects. However, she has directed some shorts that won awards at festivals and all that usual thing that you try to do to get some recognition. And I guess I have a question that's a more specific question to you than the general question earlier, which is what can young people do? So here you have a writer director who's got some representation, getting a little bit of attention, but not, it's tough. It's very tough. And although she is a woman, and that's helpful at the moment, oddly, because her boyfriend, who's a white male, can't get arrested. And that's just the way it is. Anyway, do you have any, as a woman who's been through what you've been through in the struggle and also done a lot of really good work, suggestions right now for a young woman who is really trying to make some inroads beyond all of the obvious stuff that people say on panels?
Yeah. Well,
Any specific ideas?
I now am a professor, if you can believe it, Professor Hochberg. My God, who's that? I turn around and like, who are you talking to? But I created a program at the school that I teach at, the graduate program. I teach in the graduate. I created a class called Cell Phone Cinema. And this is what I would suggest, not just to your daughter, but to anyone, because this is thousands of people are trying to do what your daughter wants to do. And I feel that, and she's already ahead of the game because she's a writer, she should write a script and take her cell phone and shoot it. There's a genius called Sean Baker who made a film called Tangerine, about two transvestites on Santa Monica Boulevard, and he shot it with an i5 PD, what is it called? Anyway, but it's like 5 to 8 iterations away in the past, and it's a brilliant film.
If I'm not mistaken, Steven Soderbergh did a feature recently on iPhone 7, right? At least that's what I was told.
It's a 7.
I haven't
Okay.
seen it.
Well, he made a film called Bubble. He used non-pros in a doll factory. And that was another brilliant. Again, that's what I would do. if I were, 28 now. I
But
would
she's
just,
done that with a couple of shorts. She's actually
no,
done
no,
that.
I would make a
But we're
feature
talking about
film.
make a feature, just go make a feature.
Absolutely. Because you are your own studio. You don't have to wait till someone gives you a yes.
Mhm.
You don't have to go into development. You are your studio, you have your camera, you have whatever equipment you can beg, borrow, and steal. One of my students put her cell phone on her bike. Another one put it on a skateboard. I mean, you can have dollies. You can, you don't need, the optics on the cell phones are phenomenal. You
Yeah.
don't need that much light. You don't need, to carry around 10Ks or whatever.
Right.
You have your computer, which is now your editing room and your mixing room and your
Yeah.
color correction, all your entire post-production you have with your camera and your computer. You
Right.
are your own studio. What's her first name, your daughter?
Dana, actually, my last legal name is actually, my name at Antioch was Brower, B-R-A-W-E-R. Dana Brower is her name.
Okay, it's Dana Brower Studios. That's what she has. And that's what she should do. That's what she should do.
Right,
She should
right.
make a film. She should make it a simple film, of course, but
Yeah.
but boy, that's what I would do.
Go shoot one. Yeah.
May I suggest no water work, limit the children, and
That's
limit
right.
the night work,
And
please.
no animals, no
No
animals.
animals.
No
I know.
animals, no
No one knew.
animals.
That's right.
What
No,
about
no
my
children,
cat?
no animals. I know. Thank you.
No
Thanks a
cat.
lot.
Thank you, Alan. I think we got time for one more here. I don't know, Victoria, do you know Robert Greenwald?
Of course, I went to school with him.
Oh, well, so David and Rasha asks, any comments on him?
Uh-oh, wait a minute. Would you just put that question in a better context, please? Like, what do you mean, any comments on him?
I don't know. David, Rasha, why don't you speak up?
Well, we were aware of his work and have actually seen him in person and a couple of times, and I'm pretty impressed with his documentaries.
Yes, Robert is an activist, or he probably was at Antioch, and then he worked for a company that this was in the late 80s, and I worked for that company. I wrote a script for that company, actually. But at that time, this was, again, when things were not so great. No, it was the early 80s. I'm sorry, it was the early 80s. And that company did not hire any women directors. So, but then he became very much more, he got back into his, political feelings, I guess, and he really became very, very good. But at the time that I knew him at school, and we called him Bobby, and he didn't, not allowed to do that because his name is, Robert. But I had to always remember that now he was an executive for a television company and things were not the way they were. And I didn't know he would really become a big, wonderful activist. So my comment would be, I knew him in the period when he was working for the system. Let me put it that way. And so, unfortunately, it didn't work, because I kept saying, why can't I direct one of these? What's going on? And no, we don't hire women. It's just not good. It wasn't a good thing. So
Well, there's a chance. I've reached out to him. I've talked to him on the phone to invite him to host one of these.
Good.
Well, he's very, very busy right now.
yeah.
He asked me to call back later, so I'll call back later.
All
But,
right.
yeah, I think he'd be a very interesting guest on one of these.
Well, I guess now that I've exposed my feelings for that period, I guess you're going to have to tell him what I said, but that's okay. I'd be curious. to know what he
I
said.
don't see anything other than pure honesty coming across, and nothing negative about that. So
No, I think he had to do what he had to do.
well,
is
sure,
really
yeah,
what it was. Yeah.
it's a tough.
Most likely, he would agree with your assessment.
I hope so. I hope so.
I think people know who they are. At least most people do, unless they're.
But I'm very pleased that he has gone on to do really important. And his wife is a director, filmmaker as well, I think, or his ex-wife, I think.
Can I jump in for a second? I forgot, speaking of well-known Antiochian documentarians, I was lucky enough, I was there right at the right time to have been a freshman when Julia Reichert and Jim Klein were teaching a film class that I got to take.
Well, good.
Little did I know what Julia would do.
Oh, yes, yes, that is really exciting. That's exciting what she's
That was
doing.
great. That's a great memory. But
Yeah.
I had no idea what would happen.
Yeah.
Oh, good, good. Oh, David, I don't know if you want to ask the question or not. I don't want to take you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
David Vincent, probably.
Which David are you
David
talking
Vincent.
about?
David Vincent, I'm sorry.
Victoria, what school are you teaching?
Could you raise your hand? Because I'd like to see who I'm talking to.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. Hi. Oh, you're right in the
Hi.
middle of it. I teach at Art Center in Pasadena, Art Center College of Design.
Yes?
Do you know Art Center?
No, I'm in Northern California.
Oh, okay. It's
Yes,
it's like it's the RISD of the West Coast, the Rhode Island School of, it's like RISD.
Oh, good.
It's a good school. I'm very happy there. Yeah, and I never thought I would end up being a teacher, but I love doing it, so it's good.
Well, you're probably a professor.
I am a professor, but I'm only a professor not because I got a PhD, but because they saw all my awards and the number of years I've been in the film business, and they made me a professor. It's like, wow, okay, thank you.
With tenure.
Pardon?
With tenure?
There is no tenure at the school.
Oh, even better.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting school. It's really a school that is focused on getting people to work right away. It's less intellectual and much more practical. So when I can show them how to get 7 shots in one master shot, that's really great. That's what they want to learn. And that's what the school likes, to hire people who work or who have worked in the profession. So it worked out very, very well. And I'm very grateful to have that work.
Thank you very much for your time
And we're
tonight.
very lucky. Yeah, we're very lucky to have had your time, Victoria. I
thank
think we
you.
should start bringing it to an end here at 6 o'clock. I did want to give Joan a chance to speak. As you know, she's our PBS fundraiser intermission, and she's got some great news for us about our fundraising activities. So before I let her do that, just make sure that next show is April 17th. And Peter Crossman, who's here watching and learning about how great an experience this is, he's going to be our guest host, and he's promised us a video. So he better open up his Mac and make something for us special, but we're looking forward to that. But just hang on for a couple of more minutes. Joan, do you want to say something real quick?
Sure. Some of you might remember that I was president of Antioch College some years ago, and now I'm working for Antioch again in the development office. So as I've said to some people, I'm a professional pickpocket these days, and I want to remind you about the March Match. Every year, we try to get some rich and generous people to put up $500,000 in March to stimulate people to contribute. And in fact, we were able to do that again this year, and we collectively have to raise the other $500,000. And this year, we're doing something a little lighthearted, and that is we're having a competition among the various chapters. We have 9 chapters competing for pizza parties. So when we can gather again together, the college will pay for a pizza party for the chapters. And we have so many categories in which you can win that every chapter really will be getting a pizza party, we hope. We'll find a way to award the prize of a pizza party to every chapter. So for example, the chapter that raises the most money, the chapter that has the most participants, the chapter that has the most new participants, the chapter that signs up the most new people in the alumni directory. We hope you're all in the alumni directory. So not only can you look for and find your friends, but your friends can look for and find you.
And Joan, if I could just jump in there, since you gave me a segue for the directory.
Yes.
We have a neck and neck competition now between the two California chapters that are doing a land office business at signing up new registrants into the directory between LA and the Bay Area. And Peter has been assiduously combing the lists.
Oh, with a lot of help
David-
from the rest of the crew here.
And Joan and David Vincent and John Knox have been beating the bushes around the Bay Area.
And Jesse.
And Jesse Hurd, excuse me, yes. So this is not, as just as Dr. Fauci says, this is not the time to get complacent. You've still got another 11 days to round up some more registrants.
Right. And let me add that if you would like to have your donation matched in March, but you can't pay in March because you're a little bit short, or you want to be more generous than what you can come up with in March, you can pledge now and pay by the end of June, and it will count toward the March match. It will be matched. So please think about how generous you can be to keep the doors open of our beloved Antioch College and educate the next generation of Antiochians. The theme this year is 100 years of co-op. We've had 100 years and we're trying to fund the next 100 years of co-op. So please let me know if you have any questions, offline if you like. Jay Stromanis at antiochcollege.edu as possible, so we can raise that $500,000 and justify the generosity and the faith of our few major donors who put up the $500,000 to induce you to do your part.
Oh, thank you, Joan. And I did my part already. It's really easy to donate by credit card or check or whatever. So I appreciate it. But I also like to thank, first of all, Victoria, all of the attendees, and then Jesse, Wendy, Joan, Tanya for managing the behind the scenes and making this a really flawless presentation. I mean, hats off to everybody to that. So remember, April 17th, we'll see you then. So thanks so much. Thank you.
Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Victoria.
Thank you all very much. This was great. I'll do it again because I had so much fun.
Thanks, both of you.
That's great.
Good.